These Cold Walls of Thunder Bay, Chapter 4. We had reached the anniversary of our first year at Thunder Bay, and as ever life was pretty hard for us. I was still working on those damned railroads, but thankfully only a few days a week now. The rest of my time was spent organising prison records. Did this mean I was getting old? Stanley continued working away in his studies. Although the guards said they would take it away from him because of our escape attempt, they let him have it back. Just as well. He was working hard to try and prove we were innocent so he could get back home to Alice. He thought that if he worked hard enough, kept his nose clean and did the best he could, he would be able to walk away back home as if nothing had ever happened. That was the difference between him and me. He was the optimist, I was the realist. I was pretty sure I knew exactly what was coming to me, and it wasn't $10,000 of hope, it was 10,000 volts. I must say I had grown accustomed to prison life. It was hard work, sure, but these people, the other prisoners, they'd become a sort of family. It was on the very day that we'd been there for a year that a new inmate arrived at Thunder Bay. Oh yes, it was a face that we all remembered. I mentioned him earlier on in my story, if you bothered to remember. Ted? Yes, it was the man that had helped us back in the good old days with the pub. Like he owned the place, he wandered into the canteen one morning, having just been caught for his part in breaking the prohibition laws. Well, that was one part of his sentence, anyway. He wouldn't tell us why, or what else he'd been caught doing, but either way, he wandered in that morning and caught my eye and greeted me with a simple "George" and a wink of the eye. It would be later that day that I was able to speak to him properly. "How the hell did you end up here?" I asked. "Total miscarriage of justice," he said, as if he was the innocent party in all this. "There was a fight. A brawl, at the pub again. I stabbed the bastard and ended up here. Was this the obvious solution to our freedom? I think not. You see, Ted made the mistake of admitting that he had in fact killed the man that he was in prison for murdering. They had their man, that's why they could so quickly have him slung in Thunder Bay, and to meet old Sparky. As for us, we still had to prove that one of us did it. Of course, Stanley was spending most of his days trying to prove that we didn't do it. My God, that man had determination. It was Sunday, and we had the day off. We still had to do our usual prison duties, working away around the prison, cleaning up, following orders, trying not to get shot, for the most simplistic thing, the jobs we were all used to doing. But that morning we got a shout. Stanley and I were being summoned to Dolan's office. What could he want? We made our way along the corridor with our ever-faithful guard Yorkie. The governor had something to say to us. "You'll be wondering why I called you here today," he said. You quickly realised at Thunder Bay you didn't reply, but instead you agreed, and pretty damn quickly. "It has come to my attention," Dolan began, "that we have two troublemakers here at the Bay. I can't stand by that and let you get away free." I caught Stanley looking at me at the corner of his eye. I would normally get the giggles if it wasn't such a serious moment. "A few months ago, during our evening of floods, you were both the ringleaders of a daring escape. Is this correct?" We both nodded. "Well then, I've your notes here, and boys, it doesn't look good for you, does it?" He looked at me once again. Again I nodded. "We were due to look at your case this week and decide if you were able to return to the outside world, free men, but because of your actions, it is my decision to keep you locked up here until proven innocent, and if I get my way, you will die in here." You little shit, I thought to myself, but well, I didn't care. I knew that I would die in here. I looked over at Stanley. "As for you, Stanley," Dolan continued, "I notice that you are studying law. I feel it is much safer for me to end your course here, deny you the chance of parole, and give you a new job." Stanley looked up. "A new job?" he asked. "Yes," Dolan continued. "A new job in law. Would you like that?" I knew there would be a catch somewhere. "Stanley, as of next week, you are going to be my executioner here at Thunder Bay. It'll be your job to activate the switch that will kill your friends. The switch that will send them off to the other realm, as it were. What do you think to that?" I could tell Stanley wanted to say something, but he couldn't. He could only nod while glaring down at the floor. "Well then, if it is all good and understood, you better get back to work, boys. Enjoy your time here," he said with that smile you just wanted to smash off his smug face. We were escorted back to the wing in almost total silence. The only words that Stanley said to me on the way back to the cells were, "I'm getting out of here." Once again, I might have actually believed him. It might have been because all of our hope was gone. We knew this day was coming, and it had finally arrived. It was the day Stanley had to perform his first kill. Of course, it was decided that the person he'd be pulling the switch on was Ted. Early that morning, Stanley got a wake-up call, earlier than usual. He was taken down the weeping walk to meet old Sparky, someone he hadn't met since the day he finished building him. He got spoken through the entire procedure, from how to tie the condemned man to the chair, to placing the sponge on their head and finally pulling the switch. "I don't exactly need a dress rehearsal," Stanley said. He kept saying that all the way through the morning, even when he came back for breakfast. Not that he could eat much, that is. The day wore on, and finally he got his call. It was actively encouraged that us other prisoners should go along and watch the execution. I don't know why. Maybe it was to give us something to look forward to. 4 p.m. arrived, and all of us were sitting in what the guards called the theatre. We could hear the cell door open and the footsteps come down the weeping walk. They would echo around the halls, making it all more dramatic than it should be. Slowly walking behind Ted, who seemed to be in a trance state, was Stanley, and close on his heels was Yorkie. I knew he would take some sort of sick pleasure out of all of this. Stanley helped the guards place Ted in the chair, and they began tightening the straps. Once the sponge had been put in place, Yorkie walked back. He passed us and caught eyes with Carter. "You'll be next," he sneered. Carter was getting more and more annoyed by Yorkie as each day went by. "I don't know why we put up with that little wanker," he said. "Someone should teach him a lesson." He'd been saying that for weeks, but this didn't seem the time or place to be talking like that. The room was silent. The only sound was that of the clock on the wall ticking, counting Stanley down to pulling the switch and counting Ted out. Maybe he was the lucky one in all this. 4:15 p.m. exactly, and Yorkie gave Stanley the signal. There was no going back. He may have hesitated for just a second, but the switch was pulled. I watched. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I could never describe to anyone, but it happened right in front of me. It seemed like forever, but it could only have been a few seconds. But eventually it passed. Ted was gone. This was certainly no theatre show like I had ever seen before. Not that I'd ever been to the theatre. At the end of the performance at the theatre, it was normal for the audience to clap. I would doubt that anyone would be clapping this. Once the deed was done and everyone started to leave, Stanley walked away without looking back. The silence of the crowd was interrupted by Yorkie. Maybe he went mad with power, or mad with something, but he began laughing manically like I'd never heard before. He took it upon himself to throw the switch back on, another zap to Ted, who had suffered enough. He was gone, but this man was content in reliving the moment. "Disgusting," said Carter. "You can't even die in peace in this place," he said. "Something's got to be done about him." I disregarded his comments. In fact, it wasn't until later on I realised exactly what he meant by it, and it wasn't good. But for now I had to be there for my brother. He had just killed someone for the first time in his life. In fact, he had just killed one of the people that had given him a step up in the world. We made our way back to the wing, where we could do something to take our minds off it. I don't know what. I can never be sure what we could do after something like that. Do you carry on as usual? Try and mend your ways, or do you enter a deep, dark depression? It didn't matter. It would be a storm in a teacup. Well, compared to what was coming. Carter had made a choice that day. He was about to do something. He was complaining of feeling unwell, and he had been for some time. The cough he had was not a good sign anyway, so when he asked for his nightly remedy of cough mixture, no one thought nothing of it. We were sitting outside our cells in near silence when Carter made a shock announcement.